Welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, Meet the Expert. I am your host, Larry DeMarco, and we are here with George Badey. George, thanks for having me here today.
Happy to be here.
George Badey has been chairman of Radnor Township's Democratic Committee since 2010, vice chairman since 2004. Radnor has about 31,000 residents and is the northernmost township in Delaware County, containing parts of the main line communities of Bryn Mawr, Rosemont, Villanova, Radnor, St. David's, and Wayne. It also has small portions of Broome Mall and Newtown Square. After a century of Republican rule, Democrats won and have been in the majority of Radnor's Board of Commissioners since 2009. In 2012, George was the Democratic candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District. He received almost 150,000 votes, over 40%. A trial lawyer since 1982, he has held a preeminent rating, the highest available from Martindale-Hubbell Law Directory since 1996, and has been listed as a Pennsylvania super lawyer in Philadelphia Magazine every year since 2005. A Radnor resident since 1987, George was valedictorian of his class at South Philadelphia High School and holds degrees from University of Penn and Villanova Law School. You can learn more about George going to www.lawbsd.com or the Radnor Democratic Committee website at www.radnordemocrats.org. George, I understand that you've had some big cases during your time, one of which was against big tobacco. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was a very interesting case. It went way back to probably one of the most significant frauds on the American public, in fact in the world, where the tobacco industry was marketing what they called a light cigarette, but in fact it wasn't any lighter, it wasn't any safer. In many ways it was even more dangerous than regular cigarettes because of the design features that they put in there to trick the federal trade commission's testing machines. And as a result of the federal government's lawsuit against the tobacco industry, which we assisted in, if you go to a store, you cannot buy a light cigarette. They sell the same cigarettes, but they're not allowed to label them as light anymore, because I could get into detail on it, but it might bore the listeners. But they add all kinds of things to the cigarette to make it appear to have less tar and nicotine, but in many ways they make it much more dangerous.
And George, as a result of your lawsuit, they're not allowed to do that anymore?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say it's from our case alone. I was part of a much broader effort, but we were very much involved in that effort.
And George, you had other big landmark lawsuits, one of which was, we have some familiar names, Bush versus Gore?
Well, we were involved in the Florida debacle in 2000, which highlighted how horrible our election system was in this country. The fact that Al Gore really got more votes in Florida than George W. Bush did, and yet it did not translate into a win for him in Florida. Officially, the official history books will say that George W. Bush got 537 more votes out of over 6 million cast in Florida. But the truth of the matter is that Al Gore really received thousands more votes than Bush, but the legal system just did not react to it appropriately, in my opinion.
And George, what did you do? What was your role?
Well, I was in Florida on the Palm Beach County butterfly ballot case. That's also described on my firm's website. I was on CNN. It was amazingly exciting. It was a real privilege to be down there and an honor. But ultimately, we did not win. We lost the case, and I firmly believe in my heart that the country lost that day as well. When later on, when the United States Supreme Court installed George W. Bush as the president, because after his 8 disastrous years, we're all worse for that.
I understand you're also chair of the Radnor Democrats. What are the duties of a chair of a Democratic township?
Well, I feel really fortunate and honored again to be in that role in Radnor. Radnor Township is my home, has been my home for more than 30 years. and it's just a fantastic place to live. It is the upper tier, the northernmost tier of Delaware County. It includes the communities of Bryn Mawr, Rosemont, Villanova, St. David's, Radnor, Wayne, and a little bit of Newtown Square and Broomall in the southern area. For over a century, it was a Republican stronghold. But I do believe that George W. Bush's presidency helped us greatly in turning it blue. It's now controlled by a Democratic Board of Commissioners since 2009. And as chair, my job is to set many things. So I'll make it really clear too. This is a labor of love. It's not a job. It's not something that I get paid for. It's a volunteer thing. It's my hobby. It's my passion. And I grew up as a Democrat in South Philadelphia, and Radnor Township is on the main line. It's Delaware County's main line, and it had been solidly Republican for over a century. And the people in Radnor Township, my friends, my neighbors, some of them were Republicans, some of them were Democrats, and most all of them were decent, caring people. And what happened is that the Republicans in Radnor Township, their party left them. The Republican Party has so drastically changed over the last 15, 20 years that those reasonable, somewhat conservative people, their party left them. So George W. Bush and Donald Trump, I mean, they don't represent your average Radnor Republican, and I think that's what I attribute most to the Democrats taking over the township.
All right, so you say their party left them, you say George W. Bush. Is that when you would say the turning point was, George, when the Republican Party changed and nationally?
I think, yes, I think the Republican Party has been drifting further rightward in social issues, and Radnor Republicans were never really socially rightward. There's fiscal conservatism, and then there's, the social issues as well. And I think that when George W. Bush became president, it really alarmed a lot of the Radnor Republicans, and we started getting more and more people registering Democrat. And basically that's what led to this, what we call the Radnor Revolution, where it became a Democratic township. Radnor is now the largest democratically controlled municipality in the county with, approximately 31,000 residents. Haverford's almost Democratic. I think Upper Darby will turn, and eventually the county as well, within the next 2 to 4 years.
All right, George, what was the makeup of your Radnor Board of Commissioners and your school board back in 2000 or right before 2000?
Well, it was back then it was 5-2 Republican, and a little bit before that it was 6-1 Republican, and then there were many, many, many years where it was 7-0 Republican. And little by little, we made some gains, and we finally took the board in 2009, 4-3 Democratic. Then in 2011, we went up 5-2 Democratic, and then it dropped back to 4-3. So right now it's 4-3, and this year we have elections for 3 commissioner spots, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th wards, which are 2 Republican commissioners and 1 Democrat. So, we're working very hard to try to win all 3 of those, which would be a very important thing a good thing for the township.
George, what's the practical difference of having a Republican-controlled board, let's say commissioners, and a Democratic-controlled board of commissioners in Radnor?
Okay, it's very important because there's a transparency and an openness with Democratic leadership that we want the people to know what's going on. We're open. We're also more attuned to the issues that concern everyday people. For example, there's a 70-acre tract of land from our Drossen farm, which was portrayed in the Philadelphia Story, the movie from way back. Katharine Hepburn played Hope Montgomery Scott. That estate was going to be, carved up and developed. And the Democratic leadership of our board got 70 acres of it dedicated to, in perpetuity to public use. It adjoins other parks in Radnor, and forever now, 100 years from now, our descendants, our children, grandchildren, their children will have this lovely, wonderful, open space available to them. The Republicans bitterly fought against it, and their argument was, we don't have the money to do it now. We have to wait. We don't have the money. Well, there was no waiting, because if it's not taken by the township now and preserved in perpetuity, it would have been sold off to Republican cronies to develop it into little McMansion tracts. That would add more traffic, more congestion, and it's just not good for our township. So that was one example of good things the Democrats did. There are many more.
Say that it would have been sold to Republican friends, cronies. What evidence do you have of that? Have you seen that happen in Radnor before?
Well, absolutely, and it's happened in the past under Republican leadership. And I'm not going to say every time the Republicans allowed land to be developed it was a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but I think that there's a fundamental difference in philosophy between the Democratic viewpoint and the Republican viewpoint. Even on my own street, for example, there's a sidewalk now, and the Republicans would always block it. Eastern College was willing to pay for it.
Be specific. What do you mean by they would block it? So you mean the
Yes,
paving of
yes.
sidewalks?
The street that I live on, and many other streets in the township now have sidewalks because of Democratic leadership. And what had happened, Eastern College, when Republicans ran the township, offered to pay for this sidewalk that led from Eastern College exit on my street all the way to the train station at St. David's. And the Republicans just wouldn't let it go through. But when the Democrats took control, that sidewalk was put in. And, the Republicans allowed a small minority of Republican voters who didn't want to be responsible for a sidewalk to block a public safety measure. The Radnor Police Department did a traffic study. They said there are over 23,000 pedestrian crossings there, mostly students and residents. And to put that sidewalk in there is to make the neighborhood safer and more walkable. And that's a Democratic achievement.
Were they blocking the paving of sidewalks? What was the reason?
Well, the people that own the houses along that where the sidewalk is would then be responsible to shovel the sidewalk if there's snow. And they were, loyal Republicans, and they enlisted the help of their commissioners. And when the Republicans ran everything, they just stopped it, even though the college was willing to pay for that sidewalk. So when the Democrats took over, they said, we need to look at this from what's best for the public interest, not for the private interest of a few constituents of Republican commissioners.
George, I understand you also ran for Congress in 2012.
I did.
And can you share some of your experience as a congressional candidate?
Well, it was a fascinating experience, Larry, and I saw you a lot on the campaign trail because at the time you were running for state representative.
Yes,
so,
you ran against
I ran against Pat Meehan.
And I ran against Joe Hackett.
Right, and unfortunately, I wasn't successful in the election. But
Neither of us were, George.
Right, but I feel that I don't regret running. I really don't.
Nor do I.
I look back on that situation and I see how that district was gerrymandered, and it's just appalling what the Republican Party has done. And I think the viewers need to know this, and I'm going to explain it as quickly and as succinctly as I can. Pennsylvania has approximately 4 million Democrats and 3 million Republicans. 4 to 3. We have 18 congressional districts in our state. And if you're going to draw the lines in a fair way, you'd say you should probably have 10 Democratic Congress people and 8 Republicans if you're going to do it in a fairly drawn way. But in 2010, every 10 years, they redraw the lines for congressional districts because they have to. Under the Constitution, the census is every 10 years, and every state has to redraw their lines to make sure that one man, one vote, and that we have roughly equal representation. So each congressional district in Pennsylvania has a little over 700,000 people in it. So in 2010, Tom Corbett got elected governor, a Republican. We had a Republican state Senate, we had a Republican state House, and we had a Republican Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. So Republicans controlled all levers of power. So they got into a room in 2011 and they drew lines for the congressional districts across the state. So with 4 million Democrats and 3 million Republicans and 18 seats, do you know who is in Washington now representing our state? We have 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats. How could a 4 million to 3 million majority of Democrats turn into only 5 Democrats and 13 Republicans in Washington? That's un-American. It's wrong. It needs to be changed.
Well, it's gerrymandering is how it happens, right?
Well, it's gerrymandering is how it happens.
It's gerrymandering in the worst way. For example, my district, our district, the 7th Congressional District, which is a big chunk of southeastern Pennsylvania, it goes from, they changed it. When Joe Sestak was the congressman from 2008 to 2010, or 2006 he won the first time, and then to 2010 he ran for Senate. But while he was the congressman, from 2000, the district was drawn one way from 2000 to 2010, and it was fairly contiguous. Most of Delaware County was in it. a large percentage of Delaware County, a little piece of Montgomery County to the north, and a little piece of Chester County to the west. It was as it's supposed to be drawn. When the Republicans got done with this thing in 2011, our district, where we're supposed to be represented in Congress, the district extended from, on the east, Philadelphia County line at Haverford Township, Philadelphia, literally across the street from Philadelphia. It meandered through Delaware County. The Republicans took out Chester, they took out Nether Providence Township, they took out Democratic areas, and so it's really convoluted. And then they went up into Montgomery County street by street to take Republican streets. Then they went through parts of Chester County, just the Republican areas. Then they went into Berks County, and then they went into Lancaster County. So this congressional district represents people literally across the street from Philadelphia, all the way out to Amish people in Lancaster County. And in Chester County, for example, it has Kennett Township, which is very Republican, but they carved out Kennett Square, which is Democratic. Same thing in Lancaster. We get Lancaster County, pieces of it that are very Republican, but the Democratic Lancaster City is not in it. Same thing in Berks. You get Republican sections of Berks County, but not Reading, which is Democratic. That is put into a different district to dilute the Democrats. So in my race, I get over 40% of the vote as a Democrat. In many of the other 13 districts where Democrats lost, we get 40% in the 40s. Now you look at the Democratic districts, they shove all Democrats into those 5 districts. So Bob Brady gets almost 90% of the vote. In the 2nd district, almost 90% of the vote. So when you see a Democrat in Congress in Pennsylvania, he's got, around 90% of the vote. When you see a Republican like Pat Meehan, he's getting in the 50s.
George, did this go into your decision to run, to fight this?
Well, yes and no. I mean, at the time I decided to run, I conferred with these people in Washington who showed me the maps and said that you have a shot. You have a shot to win. I didn't want to run as some sacrificial lamb that couldn't win. And I looked at statistics and saw that this district I thought was winnable. But as I got through it and the more I worked on it, the more difficult it seemed because, we worked very, very hard. And the other thing is money in politics. Money is a corrosive influence in politics. And I mean, I grew up in South Philly in a row house. My father was a union longshoreman. My mother was a homemaker. I grew up, and modestly. And I don't have oil companies giving me money. Pat Meehan has, all the big guys in terms of the money guys controlling him. You meet Pat Meehan and he comes across as a really nice guy, friendly on the surface, but his voting record is horrible. And I've said that to him, because, you could go up to him and he's just voted in ways that are contrary to the best interests of our people.
I was just going to say, define horrible, George. Contrary
to the best interests of the people in our district.
So who is he voting for?
He's voting, like, for example, just recently, I'll give you a very recent example. There was a 1924 law that would have allowed the House of Representatives to force the revelation of Donald Trump's tax returns. The fact that Donald Trump has not turned over his tax records is unbelievable. The fact that we can't see where are his business interests, what countries, with what companies, what are the details, where are his conflicts of interest. Every president going back for most of our lifetime has released their tax returns. Donald Trump didn't. Now, when this issue comes up in the House Ways and Means Committee, Pat Meehan is on the Ways and Means Committee. He's one of 23 Republicans. He voted with all of his Republican colleagues unanimously to block that from happening. So, Pat Meehan goes down there and he votes in ways that would be shocking to us in this district.
Sure.
And what do you attribute his brazen disregard for the best interests of the voters?
Gerrymandering. And let me explain how that works. Gerrymandering is a core, corrosive, malignant factor in American politics. And why I say that is because if this district is drawn in such a way that it favors Republicans, Pat Meehan is not worried about Democrats. Pat Meehan is worried about a challenge from the right. And in 2016, he had somebody from Berks County run against him. And they were saying, Pat's way too liberal. Not too liberal, but because the district is gerrymandered, it forces people to the extremes of their party. So if you're in a democratically controlled district, if 90% of the voters are going to vote Democrat, well, and if you're kind of a middle-of-the-road guy who is going to do what he thinks is right, you better go more to the left or you're not going to win a primary. Pat Meehan needs to lean right and vote in ways that his constituents generally wouldn't do, because he needs to win the primary. And gerrymandering has this unintended consequence where it forces elected officials to go to the extremes of their party, and that's what we have. We have gridlock because Republicans are afraid to reach across the aisle, and even Democrats are in their districts. So we need reform on redistricting right away.
George, did you have an experience representing the Radnor Democratic Party in 2015?
Yes, I did. It was the Radnor Party as well as the Delaware County Democratic Party, actually, in terms of this one case involving a Radnor school board election.
George, what happened then?
What happened was in late September 2015, we had 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats running for Radnor School Board. One of the Republicans in late September got a different job and decided that she didn't want to run or couldn't run and wanted to take her name off of the ballot. Under state law, you can only remove your name from the ballot more than 85 days out from the election. So this was way too late to have her removed. So she had to go to court and explain why she needed to be removed. And the Republicans had another candidate that they wanted to put on the ballot in her place. And when I heard about this, there had been another case several months before in 2015. In early 2015, we had 3 county council candidates filed their nomination petitions. They each got over 1,000 signatures. You only need 300. They went all over the county. We had all these signatures. That's a lot of signatures. And they went to the Bureau of Elections.
How many do they need to get?
They only needed 300, but they had, or 250, but they had over 1,000.
1,000 each, right?
Yes, each. And they went and they filed those nomination petitions with the Bureau of Elections, and they also filed their ethics form, which needs to be filed with the petitions.
Statement of financial interest, I think they call it technically.
That's right,
correct?
statement of financial interest, that has to be filed. So they filed that form, and they filed their signatures with the County Board of Elections in Delaware County. What they didn't do was that same form that they filed at the County Board of Elections, they were supposed to file that same form down the hall at the clerk's office too. So you have to file the same form in 2 places. It's kind of a hyper-technical requirement. They messed up. They technically messed up, and they didn't file the other copy in that other office.
And is there any practical reason behind that requirement?
Well, it's the law. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's not the law. It's the law, and they made a mistake. And what was the result of that mistake? Well, the Republican Party swooped right in, and they filed a challenge, and they said, aha, gotcha. You didn't. They waited till the deadline, and then they said, gotcha. You filed it here, so it's on file in the government, but you didn't file it here. Gotcha. So you're going to be thrown off the ballot. And the judge that got the case made a decision that I felt was harsh. And the judge said, I'm going to call this really tight, hyper-technical. You're off the ballot.
Fatal defect.
Fatal defect, you're dead, off the ballot. And what happened was we had to do a write-in campaign countywide in the primary in 2015, and we got those same 3, we got candidates. We got our candidates onto the ballot, but we had to go to all these extra troubles to do it.
Great expense, right, George?
Oh, it was hard for the Democrats to pull that off, but they did. But it was kind of, I felt, wow, they were super, super hyper-technical to throw the Democrats off based on such a thin technicality. But we accepted it. We didn't file an appeal. We just went a different route and did this more expensive, time-consuming, difficult process where we got to write-ins instead. But it kind of left me feeling, wow, I really think that was unfair what happened. So that was in March of 2015. And I've provided you the copy of the court's order on that. Later in 2015, Radnor's thing comes up, and the Republicans want to do this switch.
Now, and this is the same election, correct? One was the primary, and now it's the general election of the same
year.
Same election
Same year. The same election
candidates
year.
running, right, George?
Well, this is a different race. This is now, in the spring, in the primary, it was about the county council candidates, and now in the fall, in September, it's about the Radnor School District.
My point is, just so the public understands, all the candidates that were running in the spring still have to run in the fall.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So this candidate decided that she couldn't run. Fine, but it's too late, basically. At the time she came along and said, please take me off the ballots had already been printed, and dozens of ballots, absentee ballots, had already been mailed out and returned to the County Bureau of Elections. So in other words, dozens of people had already voted. many of them probably voted for her. So this isn't a technical situation where, well, we're going to throw somebody off the ballot because of a technicality. Here's a situation where people already voted.
Election began, technically, right?
The election really had already begun. So I thought to myself, wow, the judge in that case in March was so technical that he threw Democrats off the ballot. I can't imagine that a judge is going to allow the Republicans to take somebody off the ballot that's already been voted for, because the Bureau is going to have to print new ballots. They're going to have to mail ballots to people that voted. People are going to have to vote twice. It's just something to me that was, there's no way, especially after what they did to the Democrats in the spring, that the judge is going to allow the Republicans to get away with this. So I felt confident going in that, and I made the argument to the court, look, you know, it was a really tight strike zone before. Call it a fair strike zone. If you treat both parties equally, there's no way they're going to be allowed to do this. And unfortunately, the judge ruled that the Republican candidate in Radnor could remove her name, even though the ballots had been printed. And the new candidate was allowed to put her name on the ballot, even though ballots had already been printed. And the Bureau of Elections was ordered to send new ballots to all the voters that had voted so that they have an opportunity to vote twice. And if they returned that second ballot, their first ballot would be discarded. And then as a final insult, as a final slap in the face to the taxpayers of Delaware County, I asked the court, I said, I understand your ruling is what it is, but would the court consider making the Republican Party pay for the costs of all the reprinting and all the mailing that will be incurred? Because the Democrats had to incur all those costs of the write-in campaign, and I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe we lost this thing. At least the Republican Party should pay for it. And the judge said, nope. So in effect, the taxpayers did that. The taxpayers paid for the Republicans to do what they did. And it just leaves me with a bad feeling that I don't think we were treated fairly. And again, we did not appeal that either, because at that point it just wasn't going to be.
Was there coverage of this? Did the media even care?
Not much coverage. I mean, I wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and that's out there. But there wasn't a whole lot of outcry about that. And that's the problem. I mean, I think everybody is all juiced up about the presidential election and stuff like that. And when an off-year election happens in an odd-numbered year, there's a lot less interest, there's a lot less turnout, and those elections matter in many ways even more than a presidential election, because you're talking about your hometown. You're talking about who runs things in your hometown. It's very important. So I hope all the Democrats turn out to vote this year in 2017.
All right, and George, again, you did draw an analogy. What was it akin? How did the umpire in this instance
call the game?
I mean, how I saw it in the spring, when the Democrats were on the line and they filed the form, but not with both offices, only with one office, the government had that form, and yet he still called strike three and threw them all out. The strike zone was huge. The pitch was like way over the batter's head, and he called it strike three. Boom, you're out. That's rough. And now in late September, you know, this is right down the middle. They shouldn't be allowed to do this. He called it a ball, or she. There are different judges. And let me say this. You know, I'm not accusing any judge of impropriety. I'm not suggesting that there was any kind of improper influence or anything like that. I vehemently disagree with the judge's ruling, and it makes me sad that this happened in my county and in our court system. And by the way, people should know that there are 67 counties in Pennsylvania. 66 of 67 counties, all but one, have mandatory minority party representation. Delaware County is the only county in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that has unanimous all Republican representation. We have 5 members of county council, all 5 are Republican. In Philadelphia, for example, the Philadelphia City Charter requires of the 7 at-large council members, at least 2 of the 7 have to be from a minority party. So there's always some Republicans in Philadelphia city government. In every county government, Montgomery County, there are 3 commissioners in Montgomery County, and 2 are the majority party, and 1 is the minority party. There has to be 1 minority party representative out of 3 in Montgomery County. Chester County also. Every county in the whole state except Delaware County. So in our county, we have all 5 Republican county council members. We have a register of wills the controller, the sheriff, they're all Republicans, and we have 20 judges as well as some senior judges. Every single judge in Delaware County is a Republican. And when you go to Philadelphia, most of them are Democrats, but there are some Republicans.
George, has there ever been an elected judge in Delaware County?
Not in my lifetime, and I don't think there ever has been. And a couple of times we had a Democrat governor, and a judge died or retired, and a Democrat was appointed temporarily and always lost the election. So Delaware County has all Republicans. Every single elected official countywide is a Republican. And I submit to those people in Delaware County who vote Republican in off-year elections, you better step back and think about it, because I think Philadelphia is overwhelmingly Democratic, and maybe some people think that's a bad thing. There should be some competition. There should be some minority party representation to keep things going in the right way.
We have Republican judges here in Philadelphia, correct?
Some, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in most county, well, in every county, you have required minority party representation, except Delaware County. So, if you're a Delaware County Republican, I think it's time that you step back and say, hey, these people supported Donald Trump. And if I didn't support Donald Trump and I'm a Republican, I think it's time that we get some Democrats elected countywide. I think there needs to be balance. I think there needs to be sunlight. I think there needs to be an examination of who does what, and to break up this good old boys network.
George, I agree with you. That's all we have time for today. George, I want to thank you for being a guest on my show.
My pleasure, Larry.
And I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Delaware County Political News. Meek the Expert. Tune in next time.